Chapter 143, Morbid Feelings, Catherine. "Hello, Banks," exclaimed the executioner. "Got sent the morning's work, eh, old feller?" "Alas, my dear Smithers," returned the undertaker, shaking his head in a lachrymose manner, "if men will perpetrate such enormities, they must expect to go to their last home by means of a dance upon nothing." And according to a custom which years had rendered a part of Mr. Banks's nature, he wiped his eyes with a dingy white pocket handkerchief. "There he is again, the old fool," said Smithers with a coarse guffaw, "always a whimpering. Why, you don't mean to say, Banks, that you care two straws about the feller that's going to be tucked up this morning?" "Ah, Smithers, you don't know my heart. I weeps for frail human nature, and not only for the unhappy being that's so soon to be a blessed defunct carcass, but Smithers, my boy—" "Well," cried the executioner. "How much is it to be this time for the rope?" asked Mr. Banks in a tremulous tone and with another solemn shake of the head. "5 shillings, not a mag under," was the prompt reply. "That's too much, Smithers, too much," observed the undertaker of Globe Lane. The last one I bought, I lost by. Times is changin', Mr. Smithers, sadly changin'." "Ain't the morbid feelin's, as the press call 'em, as powerful as ever?" demanded the executioner. "The morbid feelings is right as a trivet," answered Banks, "but it's the blunt that falls off, Smithers, the blunt. And what's the use of the morbid feelings if there's no blunt to gratify 'em?" "Do you mean to tell me, Mr. Banks," cried the executioner, "that you can't get as ready a sale for the halters as you used to do?" "I'm afraid that such is the actual case, my dear friend," responded Mr. Banks, turning up his eyes in a melancholy manner. "The last blessed victim that you operated on, Mr. Smithers, you remember I gived you 5 shillings for the rope, and I will say, in justice to him as spun it, and them as bought it, that's a nicer, stronger, or compacter bit of cord never supported carcass to crossbeam. But vain was it that I coiled it neat up in my winder. Vain was it that I wrote on a half-sheet of foolscap, 'This is the halter that hung poor William Lees.' The morbid feelings was strong, 'cause the crowd was collected opposite my house, but the filthy lucre Smithers was wanting. Well, there the blessed cord stayed for a matter of 3 weeks, and I do believe it never would have gone at all if some swell that was passing quite promiscuously one day didn't take a fancy to it." "Well, and what did he give you?" demanded the executioner impatiently. "Only 12 shillings. As true as I'm a woeful sinner that hopes to be saved," answered the undertaker. 12 shillings, eh? And how much would you have had for the rope?" "When the blunt doesn't fall short of the morbid feelings, I calculates upon a guinea," answered Mr. Banks. "Why, you old rogue," shouted the executioner, "you know that you sold William Lees's rope a dozen times over. The moment the real one was disposed of, you shoved a counterfeit into your window, and that went off so well that you kept on till you'd sold a dozen." "No, Smithers, never no such luck as that since a Greenacres business," said the undertaker, with a solemn shake of his head, "and then I believe I really did sell 19 ropes in less than a week." "I only wonder people are such fools as to be gold so," observed Smithers. "What can they say when they see your certificate that the rope's the true one?" demanded Banks. "There was one old gentleman that dealt with me for a many, many years, and he bought the rope of every blessed defunct that had danced on nothing at Newgate for upwards of 20 years. I quite entered into his feeling, I did, and I admired the man, and so I always sold him the real ropes. But time's passing while I'm chattering here. Come, my dear Smithers, shall we say 3 shillings for the rope and certificate this morning?" "Not a mag less than 5, was the dogged answer. "4, my dear friend Smithers," said the undertaker with a whining, coaxing tone and manner. "No, 5, I tell you." "Well, 5 then," said Banks. "I'll be there at a few minutes before 9. I suppose you'll cut the carcass down at the usual hour?" Yes, answered Smithers. "I'm always punctual with the death as well as the living." The undertaker muttered something about blessed defuncts, smoothed down the limp ends of his dirty cravat, and slowly withdrew, shaking his head more solemnly than ever. "See what it is to be a public executioner?" cried Smithers, turning with an air of triumph towards his son. "Look at the perk visits, look at the privileges, and yet you go sniveling about like a young gal, 'cause I want you to make you fit to succeed me in my honorable profession." "Oh, father," cried the lad, unable to restrain his feelings any longer, "instead of being respected, we are abhorred. Instead of being honored, our very touch is contamination. You yourself know, dear father, that you scarcely or never go abroad. If you enter the public house tap room, even in a neighborhood so low as this, the people get up and walk away on different excuses. When I step out for an errand, the boys in the street point at me, and those who are well behaved pass me with stealthy looks of horror and dread. Even that canting hypocrite who has just left us, even he never crosses your threshold except when his interest is concerned. And yet he, they say, is connected with body snatchers, and does not bear an over-excellent character in this neighborhood. Yet such a sneaking old wretch as that approaches our door with loathing. wrong. Oh, I know he does. You see, Father, dear Father, that this is a horrible employment. Then pray don't make me embrace it. Oh, don't, pray don't, Father. Dear Father, say you won't, and I'll do anything else you tell me. I'll pick up rags and bones from the gutters. I'll sweep chimneys, I'll break stones from dawn to darkness, but do not make me an executioner. Smithers was so astounded at this appeal that he had allowed it to proceed without interruption. He was accustomed to being addressed on the same subject, but never to such a length or with such arguments. So the manner and matter of that prayer produced a strange impression upon the man, who constantly sought by means of rude sophistries to veil from himself and his family the true estimation in which his calling was held. Gibbet, mistaking his father's astonishment for a more favorable impression, threw himself at his feet, clasped his hands, and exclaimed, "Oh, dear Father, think not that I confound you with that pursuit which I abhor. Think not that I see other in you than my parent, a parent whom you shall obey," cried the executioner, now recovering the use of his tongue. He pointed with terrible ferocity towards the model gallows. "I'll serve you as I did that puppet just now, and as I shall do to the man down at the Old Bailey presently." Gibbet rose, disappointed, dispirited, and with a heart agitated by the most painful emotions. But why had not Smithers recourse to the leathern weapon as usual? Why had he spared the poor boy on this occasion? Gibbet himself marveled that such forbearance should have been shown towards him, since he now comprehended but too well that his father was inexorable in his determination with regard to him. The truth was that Smithers was so far struck by his son's appeal as to deem it of more serious import than any previously manifested aversion to his horrible calling, and he accordingly met it with a menace which he deemed to be more efficacious than the old discipline of the thong. "Now mind me," said the executioner after a few moments' pause. "You needn't try any more of these sniveling antics. They won't succeed with me. I tell you beforehand, if you don't do as I order you, I'll hang you up to that beam as soon as yonder mouse and the noose on the mantle. So let one word be enough. Hark, there's 7 o'clock. We've only just time to get a mouthful before we must be off." Smithers proceeded downstairs, followed by Gibbet. They entered a little parlor where Catherine was preparing breakfast. It being still dark, a candle stood on the table, and its light was reflected in the polished metal teapot, milk jug, and sugar basin. The table napkin was of dazzling whiteness. The knives and forks were bright as steel could be. In a word, an air of exquisite neatness and cleanliness pervaded the board on which the morning's repast was spread. Nor was this appearance confined to the table. The little room itself was a model of domestic propriety. Not a speck of dust was to be seen on the simple furniture, which was also disposed with taste. The windows were set off with a clean muslin curtain, and the mantel was covered with fancy ornaments all indicative of female industry. Then Kate herself. Her appearance was in perfect keeping with that of the room, which owed its cleanliness and air of simple comfort to her. A neat cap set off her chestnut hair, which was arranged in plain bands. Her dark stuff gown was made high in the body and long in the skirt, but did not conceal the gracefulness of her slender form, nor altogether prevent a little foot in a neat shoe and a well-turned ankle and a lily-white cotton stocking from occasionally revealing themselves. Then her hands were so slightly brown, her fingers so taper, and her nails so carefully kept that no one, to look at them, would conceive how much hard work Catherine was compelled to do. Though so rigidly neat and clean, Kate had nothing of the coquettish about her. She was as bashful and artless as a child, and besides, whom had she the executioner's acknowledged niece to captivate? Although she endeavored to greet Smithers and her cousin with a smile, a profound melancholy in reality oppressed her. It was one of those mornings when her uncle was to exercise his horrible calling. This circumstance would alone have deeply affected her spirits, which were never too light nor buoyant. But on the present occasion, another cause of sorrow weighed on her soul, and that was the knowledge that her wretched cousin was that morning to enter on his fearful avocation. She entertained a boundless compassion for that unfortunate being. He called forth the kindest sympathies from her naturally tender heart. Moreover, he had received instruction, was in the habit of seeking consolation from her. She was the only friend of that suffering creature who was persecuted alike, and she perhaps felt the more acutely on his account, because she was so utterly powerless in protecting him from the parental ferocity which drove him to her for comfort. She knew that a good, a generous, a kind, and a deeply sensitive soul was enclosed within that boy, and she experienced acute anguish when a brutal hand could wantonly torture so susceptible a spirit. And to that wounded, smarting spirit, she herself was all kindness, all softness, all conciliation, all encouragement. No wonder, then, if the miserable son of the public executioner was devoted to her. No wonder if she were a goddess of light and hope and consolation and bliss to him. To do her the slightest service was a source of the purest joy which that poor boy could know. To be able to convince her by a deed, even as slight as picking up her thread when it fell, or placing her chair from him in its wonted situation, this was sublime happiness to the boy. He could sit for hours near her without uttering a word, but watching her like a faithful dog. And when her musical voice, fraught with some expression of kindness, fell upon his ear, how his countenance would brighten, how his lips would form a smile, how his eyes would glow with ineffable bliss. But when his father was unkind to her, unkind to Catherine, his only friend, unkind to the sole being that ever had looked not only with abhorrence but with unadulterated gentleness on him, then a new spirit seemed to animate him, and the faithful creature, who received his own stripes with irresistance, burst forth in indignant remonstrance when a blow was leveled at her. Then his rage grew terrible, and the resigned, docile, retiring boy became transformed into a perfect demon. How offensive to the delicate admirer of a maudlin romance in which only handsome boys and pretty girls are supposed to be capable of playing at the game of love, must be the statement which we are now about to make. But the reader who truly knows the world, not the world of the sentimental novel, but the world as it really is, will not start when we inform him that the boy cherished a profound love for that young girl whom he esteemed as his guardian angel. But this passion was unsuspected by her, as its nature was unknown to himself. Of course, it was not reciprocated. How could it be? Nevertheless, every proof of friendship, every testimonial of kind feeling, every evidence of compassion on her part, only tended to augment that attachment which the boy experienced for Catherine. "Well, Kate," said the executioner as he took his seat at the breakfast table, "I've drilled Gibbet into the art of pinioning at last." The girl made no answer, but she cast a rapid glance at the boy, and 2 tears trickled down her cheeks. "Come, Gibbet," added Smithers, "we've no time to lose. Don't be afraid of your bread and butter. You'll get nothing to eat till you come home again to dinner." "Is John going with you this morning, Uncle?" inquired Catherine timidly. "Why, you know he is. You only asked the question to get a discussion once more about it, and you did last night." This was more or less true. The generous-hearted girl hoped yet to be able to avert her uncle from his intentions. "But I don't hear any more about it," continued the executioner as he ate his breakfast. "And then why do you call him John?" "Did you not give him that name at his baptism?" said Kate. "And if I did, I have also the right to change it," returned the executioner, "and I choose him to be called Gibbet. It's more professional." "I think the grocer in High Street wants an errand boy, Uncle," observed Catherine with her eyes fixed upon her cup. She dared not raise them to Smithers' face as she spoke. "Perhaps he would take John, my cousin, and that would be better than making him follow a calling which he does not fancy." "Mind your own business, Miss Impertinence," said the executioner, "and let me mind mine. Now then, who knocked at the front door?" Gibbet rose and hastened from the room. In a few moments he returned, holding in his hand a paper which he gave to his father. "I thought so," said Smithers as he glanced his eye over the paper. "My friend Dognatch is always in time. Here's the last dying speech, confession, and a true account of the execution of the man that I'm to tuck up presently. All cut and dry, you see. Well, it's very kind of Dognatch always to send me a copy, but I suppose he thinks it's a compliment due to my situation." With these words, Smithers tossed off his tea, rose, and exclaimed, "Now, Gibbet, my boy, we must be off." "Father, I don't feel equal to it," murmured the boy, who seemed fixed to his chair. "Come, without another word," cried the executioner in so terrible a tone that Gibbet started from his seat as if suddenly moved by electricity. Uncle, you cannot force this poor lad," began Catherine, venturing upon a last appeal in favor of her cousin. "Kate," said the executioner, turning abruptly upon her, while his countenance wore so ferocious an expression of mingled determination and rage that the young girl uttered a sound of alarm. "Kate, do not provoke me, or—" He said no more, but darted on her a look of such dark, diabolical menace that she sank back, annihilated as it were, into her seat. She covered her face with her hands and burst into an agony of tears. For some moments she remained absorbed in profound grief. The fate of the wretched boy and the idea that she herself was doomed to exist beneath the same roof with the horrible man whom she called her uncle were causes of bitter anguish to her sensitive and tender soul. When she raised her head and glanced timidly around, she found herself alone. Okay, that's it. I guess the next chapter will take us a little bit further. I'm not sure what this side story has to do with the main story, but since we have well over 100 chapters left, it could be just about anything. All right, see you for the next chapter.